Imagine this situation. You find yourself involved in a relationship that completely consumes you. At times, you perceive it as the pinnacle of passion, an intense, vibrant experience brimming with chemistry. Other times, however, the feeling is like walking through a minefield, where words can wound more deeply than silence, and small gestures turn into pretexts for arguments. Even the simple desire for personal space, for a moment to breathe, becomes a reason for guilt. Yet, despite everything, you choose to stay. This decision isn't born out of convenience or weakness, but from an inner conviction that this love is worth the sacrifice, that this chaos is the price to pay for a profound bond. Before we dive in, if this topic resonates with you and you want to learn more about building healthier relationships, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming videos. Your support truly makes a difference. It's crucial to understand that many toxic relationships don't reveal themselves as such from the outset. They build up gradually, layer by layer, often beginning with displays of affection, commitment, and promises. However, at a certain point, almost imperceptibly, what was affection transforms into control. Care becomes surveillance, and connection evolves into dependency. It's a change that isn't always clearly seen. Rather, you constantly feel indebted, as if loving means diminishing yourself. Perhaps you've experienced something similar, or maybe you know someone trapped in this type of dynamic. These are people who tend to justify harmful behaviors with phrases like, "He acts this way because he loves me too much," or "She's just insecure. She doesn't mean any harm." In doing so, they end up legitimizing attitudes that, in reality, drain their vital energy. We're talking about relationships where you feel guilty for wanting a bit of tranquility, where a simple no is enough to trigger emotional blackmail, punitive silences, or unpredictable outbursts. Then the worst part sets in. You start to doubt yourself. Am I exaggerating? Am I the problem? This is one of the most insidious and dangerous characteristics of a toxic relationship, its ability to distort your perception of reality. Slowly, it undermines your self-esteem and leads you to confuse love with mere emotional survival. This text is not meant as an accusation or a judgment. Rather, it's an invitation to honestly observe the dynamics we call love, which in fact might be poisoning our emotional health. We will explore together 7 psychological signs that indicate the presence of a toxic relationship, based on the reflections of some of the most brilliant minds in the field of psychology. You won't find superficial advice or self-help cliches here, but rather uncomfortable yet liberating truths. Sometimes, indeed, all we need to break a destructive cycle is to be able to see what was previously hidden. If you are ready to face this journey with courage, continue reading. What follows might touch sensitive chords, but it also has the potential to set you free. Some of the most toxic relationships are also the hardest to leave. The reason? They offer us something that at first glance appears rare and precious: intensity, moments of emotional euphoria, passionate reconciliations after explosive fights, a jealousy that seems to confirm how much the other cares. It's like being on an emotional roller coaster, and every descent, every dizzying ascent, reinforces the feeling that there's something profound in that bond. But intensity is not synonymous with love, and this is one of the most dangerous misconceptions we can carry. Freud explained this clearly when he spoke of the repetition compulsion, that unconscious tendency to seek out emotional experiences reminiscent of childhood traumas. If you grew up in an unstable environment where affection and pain were often associated, your brain learned that love must involve suffering, that it's real only if it leaves you in doubt, if it destabilizes you, if it hurts. That's why, when you enter a relationship marked by emotional instability, you don't reject it. You recognize it as familiar. Erich Fromm also addresses this theme when describing so-called symbiotic love, a type of bond in which two people merge into an illusion of unity, yet remain trapped in a dynamic of dependency. In this type of relationship, drama becomes the norm, and without realizing it, you begin to confuse emotional turmoil with affective depth. You believe that if it hurts, then it's real. But the truth is harsher. Intensity is not love, it's imbalance. Healthy relationships are often calm, consistent, even considered boring by those addicted to emotional adrenaline. And this addiction is real. The brain releases dopamine during cycles of tension and relief, creating a kind of chemical dependency on the conflict itself. You get used to chaos. You start to think that love is something that throws you off balance, that consumes you. And this is where the cruelest deception lies. This type of emotional bond is so powerful because it offers the illusion of depth. You think you've found someone who makes you feel like no one else before, when in reality, what you feel is the reactivation of an old, unhealed pain. That's why the more intense the relationship, the harder it seems to let go. But what happens when you start to believe you can save the other person? When you think that with enough love, this emotional roller coaster will finally stabilize? Now we will address a common and dangerous pattern in toxic relationships, the desire to fix the other. You start to notice destructive behaviors, traits of emotional imbalance, moments when the other pulls away, sabotages the relationship, explodes, and something within you activates, an urgent need to heal, help, save. Suddenly, the relationship ceases to be a simple emotional connection and transforms into a mission, a project. And you, without realizing it, assume the role of the savior. This is an emotional trap disguised as altruism. The internal logic is subtle but powerful. If I love him enough, he will change. If I am patient, she will understand how much she is hurting. If I endure a little longer, everything will be fine. The problem is that this narrative isn't about the other person, it's about you. It's about an emotional wound desperately seeking meaning, validation, and attempting to find it by turning the other into a reflection of your own shadow. Carl Jung directly described this process as projection. You see unresolved aspects of yourself in the other. What you deny, repress, or don't want to face in your own psyche is projected onto the person you love. If you deny your insecurity, you might be attracted to someone insecure and try to strengthen them. If you hide your anger, you might get involved with someone explosive and try to calm that side. It's an unconscious way of trying to heal yourself by fixing the other. Fromm also addressed this aspect when talking about neurotic love, a type of conditional affection. I feel worthy only if I am useful, if I am needed, if I am indispensable. This type of love is never free. It needs to be earned through sacrifice. And this is where you get trapped in a cycle of chronic frustration. The more you try to help, the more frustrated you become. The more the other resists, the more you insist. And when things don't improve, you don't blame the other. You blame yourself for not having done enough. However, there's a hard truth to accept. You are not in a relationship. You are on an emotional battlefield, fighting against ghosts that are not yours, trying to save someone who may not even want to be saved. And the more you try to fix them, the more you break yourself in the process. Up to this point, which of these signs or dynamics resonated with you the most? Is there anything you've recognized in your own experience or in someone you know? Leave a comment below. Your insights are invaluable and can truly help others in this community. In the midst of all this, something even more dangerous happens. Little by little, you start to lose yourself. Your opinions, your desires, your boundaries begin to vanish. Everything starts to revolve around the other person, and when you realize it, you no longer know who you are outside of that dynamic. Now we will talk about the loss of identity, one of the most silent yet destructive signs of a toxic relationship. At first, you still remember who you were. You had your own opinions, clear desires, defined dreams, but gradually all of this begins to dissolve. What do you like? It depends. What do you want? I don't care. What do you feel? You don't even know anymore. When you're in a toxic relationship, this disconnection from yourself doesn't happen abruptly. It's gradual, insidious, almost imperceptible, until you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the person you see. This is one of the deepest and most devastating effects of these relationships, the erosion of identity. Erich Fromm called it symbiotic fusion, a state where two people cease to exist as individuals and become an indistinct emotional entity. It's the kind of relationship where everything revolves around the other. Their mood dictates your day, their crises control your decisions. You start to shape your behavior to avoid conflicts, recalculate every sentence before speaking, give up little things, one after another, until nothing is left that is just yours. This is where Freud comes in with his concept of ego repression. When we are trapped in a dynamic where pleasing the other is a matter of emotional survival, we begin to repress our own impulses. We silence our anger, ignore our discomfort, suppress our desires. Over time, we become only what the other needs or demands us to be. This disconnection also manifests in subtle ways. You start dressing differently, distancing yourself from people who were once important, abandoning projects that excited you, all in the name of harmony. But in reality, you are slowly fading away, ceasing to exist to keep the relationship alive, and that is too high a price. The most dangerous part is that this loss of identity doesn't cause obvious pain. It manifests as emptiness, apathy, a chronic feeling that something is wrong but you can't name it. And when you try to regain your autonomy, when you try to set boundaries, guilt arises. You feel selfish for wanting space, for wanting time just for yourself, for saying no. And this is exactly what we will talk about now. How in toxic relationships the simple desire for autonomy is transformed into an emotional sin, and how guilt becomes a tool of control. In a healthy relationship, space is a natural necessity, silence is allowed, solitude is respected, and having boundaries is not seen as rejection, but as part of building a mature relationship. But in a toxic relationship, something essential transforms into something forbidden. The desire for space becomes an accusation, silence a threat, autonomy selfishness. And what arises from this? Guilt. You start to feel bad for wanting to sleep alone, for not responding immediately to a message, for going out with friends without having to explain every detail. The idea of prioritizing yourself makes you uncomfortable, as if loving yourself were a betrayal of the other. The most insidious part is that often this guilt is not imposed explicitly. It is subtly instilled through glances, silences, emotional manipulations like, "You've changed, you don't care about me anymore," or the dreaded, "If it were the other way around, I would never do this to you." Freud describes this process as the operation of the punitive superego, an instance of the psyche that internalizes criticisms and authoritarian rules, making the individual feel constantly guilty for satisfying their own needs. And in toxic relationships, this superego is reinforced every day by the partner's behavior. Over time, you learn to anticipate guilt, to censor yourself even before expressing a desire, to deny your own will to avoid the emotional weight that follows. It's like living in a system of psychological surveillance where every step must be calculated to avoid triggering the other's emotional reaction. And the effect of this is brutal. You stop breathing deeply, stop relaxing, stop existing naturally. You become an edited version of yourself, always available, always present, always alert. And behind this forced submission lies the unconscious belief that to love is to nullify oneself. But what if you stopped feeling responsible for maintaining the other's emotional stability? What if the guilt you carry isn't yours? This is the question that leads us to the next point. When you not only feel guilty for distancing yourself, but start to see yourself as emotionally responsible for the other's suffering. When you believe you cannot leave because their pain would be too great. Have you ever thought about leaving? Have you mentally rehearsed breakup conversations? Have you imagined moving on with your life, rebuilding yourself? But something holds you back. Something stronger than the fear of loneliness, more paralyzing than guilt, the other's suffering. Their pain becomes the invisible chain that keeps you in the relationship. And it's not just about empathy. It's about distorted emotional responsibility, carrying the weight of the other as if it were your own. You tell yourself, "I can't abandon them now, they're going through so much. They only act this way because they have suffered a lot." And so you transform the role of partner into caregiver. And if the other shows fragility, if they threaten to crumble, you become even more necessary. This creates the dangerous illusion that your presence is the only emotional foundation supporting that person, that your absence would be a form of cruelty. But is this love, or is it emotional imprisonment disguised as compassion? Carl Jung pointed to this phenomenon when discussing unconscious identification with archetypes, especially that of the martyr. When you cling to the other's pain to the point of forgetting yourself, you are living an archetypal narrative. The savior who gives up everything to heal the other, even if in the process they destroy themselves. And what seems noble actually masks a deep disconnection with one's own worth. Erich Fromm also described this as a form of neurotic love, one that persists not out of conscious choice but out of fear, need, emotional addiction. You are not there because you want to be, you are there because you feel you have to be. And with that, the other's suffering becomes a form of manipulation, even if unconscious. Every tear, every outburst, every emotional collapse reinforces your obligation to stay. But here's the hard truth to accept. You are not responsible for healing the pain that the other refuses to face. Your presence does not save anyone. Often it merely postpones the inevitable collapse for both. And the cruelest part is that while you cling to the other's pain, something familiar hides behind this dynamic, the feeling of reliving something old, as if that relationship, no matter how dysfunctional, echoed childhood memories, patterns already lived. And that's why it feels strangely right. Have you ever wondered why certain relationships seem to follow the same script, even when the people change, as if you were living the same story with new characters? You promise yourself that this time will be different, that now you know what to avoid. But somehow everything repeats itself. The same pains, the same absences, the same silences that scream. This is not a coincidence, it's a pattern. And according to Freud, it has a name: repetition compulsion. In psychoanalysis, this compulsion is an unconscious mechanism that leads us to seek and repeat unresolved childhood pain, not out of masochism, but as an unconscious attempt to rewrite the past, to live the same scene, but with a different ending. You may have grown up with emotional absence, rejection, instability. And now as an adult, you are drawn precisely to those who offer you more of the same because, unconsciously, you believe that this time it will be different. This time you will be loved. This time you will not be abandoned. Freud also described the phenomenon of transference, the tendency to transfer to current figures, feelings that originally belonged to figures from the past, such as parents or caregivers. That's why you might fall in love with someone emotionally unavailable, not because you like to suffer, but because this unavailability activates an old emotional memory, and deep down, something inside you believes that if you can win the love of this new figure, you will finally heal an old wound. The problem is that this rarely happens. On the contrary, the more you try to change the script, the more trapped you become because you are not dealing with the present. You are trying to heal the past with emotional tools that have already proven to be flawed. And while you try to rescue the wounded child within you, the adult you are fades away, exhausts, breaks. This is where the darkest aspect of this pattern comes in. You start to think that pain is normal, that discomfort is part of love, that healthy relationships are boring because they don't activate your triggers. Toxicity becomes your comfort zone. But even when you realize all this, even when you understand that you are trapped in a destructive cycle, you still hesitate to leave. Why? Because there is something even more frightening than repeating the pain. The emptiness of not knowing who you would be without it. And it is exactly this fear that we will talk about in the final part. Have you ever thought about leaving? Have you visualized your life without that person? Have you caught yourself fantasizing about silence, about peace, about the freedom to be who you are without fear of judgment, without guilt, without tension? But soon after comes the emptiness, a coldness in your chest, a whispered but persistent question. What if I am nothing without him, her? What if I never find someone again? What if this suffering is all that's left for me? What do you think? Write it in the comments. As you may have noticed, we are offering important insights into your journey. Leave a like to support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and activate the bell to stay up to date on new content. Your support helps me continue this important work. Answering the questions above, this fear is real, and it is one of the most paralyzing. In many cases, it has nothing to do with the love you feel for the other, but with the deep disconnection you have with yourself. Jung spoke about this when addressing the fragile ego and the lack of individuation. When your identity is fused with the relationship, leaving it feels like leaving you formless, structureless, as if the other were your only mirror. Without him, her, who are you? And Fromm complements this reasoning by stating that many people love not for freedom, but for escape. Escape from the existential fear of being alone, escape from confronting themselves, escape from the silence which so often echoes questions we avoid our whole lives. This kind of love is not a choice, it is anesthesia. You stay even knowing that the relationship is destroying you because the emptiness seems scarier than the pain. Because on some level you believe that known suffering is preferable to the unknown of starting over. And this is not cowardice, it is a reflection of an old wound. that of never having learned to feel whole while being alone. And perhaps no one taught you this, to be with yourself without abandoning yourself, to respect your limits without feeling guilty, to love yourself without depending on another to feel alive. But the truth is, you will only be able to live a true love when you no longer need to lose yourself to be with someone. Relationships should not crush you or fragment you. They should expand who you are. If that is not happening, maybe it's time to stop asking what is wrong with you and start asking yourself why you still call this love. You deserve something better, but before seeking outside, you need to find it within. Courage is not leaving without pain. Courage is staying true to yourself, even when everything outside tries to make you forget who you are.